My life was pretty normal as an American living as an expat in Singapore. My husband and I, at the time, had moved from Houston, Texas to Singapore in 1998. And a year later, I gave birth to a boy and a girl, twins, Nils and Claire. And soon after, I was doing a jewelry design business, which kept me really happy. I was traveling, I was working in stores across Southeast Asia, and life was great and easy. My kids attended a local school, then they went to the Singapore American School. They were thriving in their sports and their after school activities. And Nils was, I think I would describe him as like a pretty good looking kid. He was apparently like, I had been told that he was the most handsome kid in school at the time. He kind of had these movie star looks. He was tall and he was tan and he had these hazel green eyes and this really killer smile. And I remember one day at home, Claire had invited like 3 of her friends over to hang out with her. They were about 10 years old. And we had this piano in the living room, and Nils was taking his piano lessons, and he was playing the song by Maroon 5 called She Will Be Loved. And these girls walked in and they sat down and they were kind of watching him as he started to sing, and they were looking at him, and I could see him kind of looking at the girls, and they were just kind of transfixed. And it was the grin that he gave them that I knew I was going to be in really big trouble, because when he grew up, he was going to break some hearts. But he was a live wire. He was inquisitive and he loved to do things his way. I remember he was kicked out of preschool when he was like 3 years old because he would climb up the slide and he wouldn't, go down. And the teacher was not happy with him, nor me. He didn't really like rules. He was good at languages and math and music, but he struggled with his homework. And I remember him saying when he had cancer that cancer did not like school. And I just said, well, that's too bad. You're still going to have to study. But he played all sorts of sports. He played basketball and he played baseball and soccer and rock climbing. And he was really good at all of them. And I think as he grew into his sports, he kind of realized his athletic skills with playing on team sports. He kind of started to calm down and he mellowed and he found his footing, and that kind of release that sports allow you to have. And I think it was finally as if he could see who he wanted to be, being a friend to both the popular kids, but the unpopular ones. And I watched him learn how to help other kids. And I remember him being able to take control of a room, especially around doctors and when he was talking about, what he was going through. And recently I had come across a photograph of Nils during his cancer journey in a jersey for his football team. And he was on the football field and his dad was standing next to him. And I didn't know what the conversation was about. So I called his dad recently and I said, can you tell me what that was? And he said, Nils wanted to go see his teammates, even though he was still in the hospital. And his dad wheeled him out onto the pitch and the boys took a knee. And Nils just told these kids how he missed them, but the important story was he wanted them each to know how lucky we are to be alive and how lucky everyone is in their life. And I just, I'm grateful to have these opportunities to talk about Nils and to remember him with my daughter, and that we have time to share. So I appreciate you giving us this space to do that. So thank you. I will never forget it. It was, I was frozen. I was dumbstruck. It was in October of 2012, and I remember sitting in a conference room at a large table that was filled with these windows on the 8th floor at NUH Hospital. And these 5 doctors walked in with the white coats, as you would imagine, and the lead doctors said to us that NILS had cancer, and it was stage 4 lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's, and it was a rare one. That there were only 1 or 2 cases like this seen in the region per year, and that with treatment, there was a high chance of relapse and a low rate of success. And he also had a life-threatening autoimmune disease. And I just could not understand, what they were telling me. I mean, like, how is it that one day my healthy 13-year-old young boy is playing football and the next day he's got 4-stage cancer and a rare autoimmune disease? I mean, it was shocking, but I'll back up. Prior to that, Nils' diagnosis, he had gotten a cold. He would get colds now and then, and I would always treat him, with some meds and keep him home from school. But he wanted to go play football that day, and I said, please don't play football. I really want you to take care of yourself. But he didn't want to do it, and he wanted to be with his mates, and he played, and he was so exhausted that he had to be taken up the stairs when he got home and carried and put to bed. And the next day he didn't get any better. And I said, let's go to Mount Tavernia, let's get some medication and we'll be home, in a few hours. But he wasn't home in a few hours. He was there for a week, and they were doing tests and he was getting worse and worse, and he was in ICU, and we had to take an ambulance to the hospital NUH, where they had to do 5 exploratory surgeries. And that's when they found out he had cancer. And I remember sitting there thinking, is he going to die? And what am I going to tell his twin sister, Claire? And I stopped breathing and I grabbed the chair really tightly underneath me just to make sure that I was actually there and hearing it. And, we've all heard about cancer affecting people and people that we know, but never did I believe it would be someone in my family, and definitely not a child of mine. And I wanted my life back. I wanted his life back, but I just began to pray and talk to God. I think there are no words that are available for losing a child to death's door. It is every parent's worst nightmare. And after he died, I really didn't want to go on living. I mean, what was I supposed to do after witnessing death? And I had lost the best job I ever had. I had taken care of him for a year and a half, doing the most intense work that I'd ever done, the most meaningful work I'd ever done, and it just stopped. And I would wake up in the mornings and I would just look up at the ceiling and talk to him and cry, and anxiety would come in, and this confusion about, is this my new normal? Is this what the rest of my life is going to be? And it took me a long time to kind of pull myself together and to start this healing journey. And I remember I started with a therapist, and then I did some somatic therapy. And then I found something called trauma release exercise, TRE, which was the most powerful. And this is when we have stress or trauma that's stored in our body, it physically needs to come out. And a lot of people really have a difficult time talking about their feelings. So this technique uses these certain exercises to shake off the stress. It's kind of like animals' fight or flight, if you can understand that. Their bodies tremble after they've been in a fight or flight experience, whereas humans have kind of not had to do that over, the many, many years. But this therapy is what I was told it was used in active military duty personnel, and also with veterans with PTSD, which is post-trauma stress disorder, because it doesn't require us or the person to verbally relive that trauma. So I did this, on and off, days and days, for weeks and months. And it really helped me. And then one of my friends, who was a therapist, she sat me down one day and she gave me some really good advice. And she said, grief needs to happen and it's going to come out. But starting the process earlier than later will be easier on you, because you're going to have people around you to support you and hold that space for you while you're going through this process. Because if you're going to wait later or years later, there may not be people around you who are going to understand what you're going through and why you delayed that process. And I've heard that if you delay grief, that sometimes it can cause all sorts of chronic illnesses and pains and, weakened immune system. So I decided to start. But I think the most important tool that I found was writing. And I remember the day I started writing, my kids it was their birthday in July 2nd, and I was home alone, and Claire was at camp in the summer in the United States, and NILS was in heaven. And I remember I was so upset and just not in control. And I just opened up my computer at 5:00 in the morning, and I just let my fingers across the keyboard, and I just poured out all my emotions, the pain and the anger, the loss, and then the laughter and the joy. And I ended up writing for weeks, every day, reliving every single moment of that cancer journey. And I think that the more I wrote, the more I realized I was in control, and the more I healed, and I could start to move forward. And I did. I think for me, it unfolded naturally. It just happened naturally. I wanted to memorialize the passing of NILS. And in 2015, my daughter Claire and I started doing these annual toy drives to support children with cancer. And what I wanted to do is, my vision was to create a Toys R Us in the hospital. This is a toy experience that these kids could have in their hospital room, at their bedside, in the patient's outside area, where they could come in, their siblings and their parents could walk in, and the kids could choose any toy that they wanted. And I remember when we did that, just seeing these smiles on these kids' faces, and even more, the parents were just, seeing their kids happy. And there was this tension that just dropped out of their body. And it was kind of like the cancer just went away. And it was really magical to see that transformation in their bodies. And, a lot of people don't understand that a toy can transform something so quickly, but just little things like that happen. And a couple of years after we'd been doing these toy drives, my daughter got recognition from the school, and there was an organization called Women Doing Good, and they asked us to present to a panel with some other nonprofits that were going to be presenting. And I honestly had no idea how to present. I had never done that for something like this before. So I stood up there and I talked about children with cancer and what a toy could do to make, change the day in a cancer life of a child and why it was important. And lo and behold, we won $5,000, and I was told to report back in like 4 or 5 months of what I was going to do with that money. So I sat for a long time, and that's when I came up with the idea to start a nonprofit, and we registered the charity in 2017, and we called it Love NILS. And the name was really symbolic because when Nils was sick, he would write letters to his friends in the community saying, "Thank you for helping me beat my cancer." And he'd sign off Love NILS. So it became a conscious decision for me then to fill in this gap that I had seen over the year and a half of care, that there needed to be more psychosocial support, there needed to be more emotional support, and there needed to be a community of support that would help these families and their kid, the families and the children. And, over the years after we started Love NILS, we grew 9 programs, not at once, but over time. We had the toy drives, and we had art therapy, and we did educational support programs. We had Calendar of Hope, where we'd get tickets and we'd give it to the families and the kids so they could go to a musical or a play. We had education support and pen pals, and it just kind of grew, and it just happened that way. So it was a great group of programs across 3 hospitals in Singapore. I think my biggest fear was walking back into the halls and the rooms of the hospital that my son and I lived in. There was a fear that I would possibly break down in front of a family that I was helping, because the flood of memories would come back. Another fear was, what would I say to a family that I was serving if they asked me, how was Nils doing? And I was always worried to say, if he had passed away, or how would I approach it? And it varied according to families of how I would respond. But I think the desire was greater than the fear. I'd been in these family shoes, from treatment in Singapore all the way to Seattle in the United States. And I knew what my family needed and what worked for us and what didn't. And I knew that I could just help their journey be a little bit easier. But I think what really was confirmational was the hugs that I'd get from these kids and their parents. That made me understand I was doing a good job. And the fear just kind of went away, and the healing began, and the work lay ahead of me to put these programs together that I knew could help. And I remember one day that really confirmed it is I was in my office, and this man had come over to bring some laptops to donate to the children with cancer. And his daughter had cancer and been treated at the hospital, and she had just passed away about 4 or 5 months earlier. And I could tell that he really needed someone to talk to. So I pulled him aside, and I sat down, and he just started talking about the whole journey of what her life was like and how long it was, and then death and afterwards and what happened. And he just told this entire story. His tears were flowing, and he talked to me for a couple of hours, and then he left. And I remember just sitting there afterwards for quite a while and just being thankful that I wasn't afraid, that the fear had not come back, and that God had given me the understanding of how I could hold space for this person and let me just know that was my purpose of what I was supposed to do. I think walking with these families facing childhood cancer over the years, I've learned that resilience is not loud. It's quiet. It's practical. It shows up quietly daily, day after day, in the hospital rooms, in the ICU rooms, and in the homes. And resilience is a parent learning how to function with no sleep day after day, taking care of a child being tied up to multiple tubes of chemo, or trying a cancer clinical trial that they don't have any guarantees. I think resilience is brought up through repetition. You know, these kids and their families are doing this day in and day out, weeks upon weeks, months, and sometimes even years, when they don't even know if the outcome is going to be certain for them. And I've watched parents become extremely fierce advocates, and children who have developed levels of emotional maturity far beyond their years. And I remember there was a family that I became very close to, who was a young woman, mother of a child who was about maybe 3 years old. And they were in a hospital room that I had come to do some work with some other families. And she was in the room with 6 other families. There was curtains in between the families. She had a chair that she would sleep in and stay in during the day. And her 3-year-old was in a cot. And, you know, he is tied to all these chemos. And, you know, cancer doesn't care what age you are. They just affect anyone. And they don't have babysitters in the hospitals. And especially when you have a young child that doesn't understand, and he's trying to pull out the tubes, and the determination and the endurance that this woman had to do it day in and night and for weeks and months, and, you know, get through the battle, and just to keep her son alive and to keep him, you know, going. And I remember just watching them grow through the years and stay positive. And he just blossomed as this young boy. And he had so much insight about life when he beat his cancer, and wisdom. And it was just incredible that they were beating the odds. And I also think that families learn a new normal over and over again, because the old ones just don't exist anymore. And I've also learned, I think, that resilience is relational. It's nobody can do this by themselves, and families survive because of connections. And when we have support systems in place, as my daughter says, people bend, but they don't break. When I moved back to America about 3 years ago with Love, and I was still working at Love NILS, I focused on raising funds and awareness in the USA. And then I kind of stepped away for a while the charity ran itself. But this past August, I made a decision to redirect the charity's direction to one that's more laser focused and able to help more children longer. So it's with a full heart that Love NILS is closing its chapter as a registered charity. But we've come full circle. Love NILS began at the National University Hospital, where we created the very first care coordinator program at the pediatric oncology department in 2017. And it was very important for me that we had this program. I had had a care coordinator when we were in Seattle, and the difference that it makes is incredible. It's integral. This person, you know, they help guide the patients and the caregivers through all the healthcare system, navigating it from the beginning of diagnosis. They provide emotional support with getting them aligned with other types of therapies. They do school visits. They come to your home and do home visits. They do educational talks. They help with financial resources. They work with your insurance company and other healthcare providers, and they're just integral. So, as we close our doors at Love NILS, we have decided to take every financial asset that we have, and we've moved it into New Age. It's about $750,000, and Love NILS has gifted it back to the hospital to ensure that this role will continue for a long time. So I'm excited about that we'll have a plaque in the hospital with the charity's name on it that will say that we have donated the care coordinator role for years to come. And I'm really proud that NILS' legacy will live on in such a meaningful way. But as that chapter closes in my life, I am launching an advisory practice focused organization that will help nonprofits through transition and growth. So watch this space. West Nile virus. Who would have even imagined? It's been a year and a half ago that I got bit by a little mosquito, and I didn't even know it. I had fever for about 10 days, and then my right leg just buckled. And at the time, I was training to go hiking in Colorado with my family, and I was going to go do my annual trek up to the Continental Divide to go visit NILS, where he has a plaque at the top of the mountain. And I called my doctor, and he said, just go to the hospital and check it out and you'll be fine. So I go to the hospital, and my right leg had completely stopped working by the time I got there. My foot was dragging, and I could barely raise my right arm. And it was like I'd had a stroke. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, and they did every kind of test that you can imagine. We did spinal taps, we did MRIs, we did CT scans, we did blood scans, and they couldn't really confirm anything, but they told me they thought I had multiple sclerosis. And that was a shocker, but they couldn't confirm it. So they let me out, and I went to a rehabilitation inpatient center where I did daily rehab. And after 2 weeks of that, I was still in a wheelchair and I was on a walker. They let me go home. But going home, I had to have a 24-hour nurse that would take care of me, because I literally could do nothing. I couldn't take care of myself. I could barely get up and down the stairs. We had to put a gate belt around me to get me up the stairs and down the stairs. And it was pretty humbling. So then after about 6 weeks, I went to see my neurologist, who told me then that I had the West Nile virus, and that the virus had damaged the nerves in my lower right spine. And it was after I left, I had to find out on my own that humans contract the virus through a mosquito that bites you, but they get it from birds that carry the virus. And when the mosquito bites a human, most likely our symptoms are, a fever, and then they go away and you get better. But sometimes, in rare cases, it can be deadly. And then in less than 1%, the people can get meningitis, encephalitis, or a serious neurological illness. And there are no vaccines or antiviral treatments. So I was in the less than 1%. And later I remember asking my neurologist, do you think I'll ever walk again? And he looked at me with like hardly any compassion and said, you may get better. You're walking now on a walker. And I remember being so angry and so scared. But I think that anger just turned into like pure determination. So my daughter moved in to take care of me. And that's kind of when the healing started. And I was doing physical therapy 3 times a week, aqua therapy once or twice a week. I was in the gym doing whatever exercises they had told me to do. And then I'd go home and do the exercises. And I remember I just focused and I prayed. I prayed like I did when Nils got sick. I prayed all the time. And I remember having my little pity parties, which I would cry uncontrollably. And I'd ask, why me? What's the lesson that I'm supposed to learn from this one? But I think crying is necessary for healing because, it was grief that I'd lost my leg. And I found that through the physical therapy and through this rehabilitation, that it's really important to keep a log of the progress that you make, especially in rehab. You can plateau sometimes. It doesn't seem like anything's changing or you're not getting better. But when you do have these tiny breakthroughs, it's really important to celebrate them and, to celebrate these wins so that it kind of helps you with the healing process. So for 10 months I did that, and I graduated to walking on hiking poles. And that's when I decided I wanted to go to Colorado and I wanted to see NILS. And, Claire and I drove up to Colorado and I found someone to make me a leg brace to help me walk up and down the inclines because I couldn't do that yet. So I trained for a month, and there's, like an aspect in recovery that I found that my mind was trying to protect me. So sometimes it would freeze. It wouldn't allow me to do things. I would literally just get stuck or paralyzed. Like I couldn't move if I was trying to go up a hill or down a trail. And sometimes I'd just sit down and I'd start crying. Or I would end up crawling on my hands and knees up or scooting on my bum down. And then I would slowly kind of work through it. And my brain would kind of catch up and say, okay, I got it. You've overcome this. And luckily I trained with a friend that came and visited me, and she was really amazing. She just kind of gave me this courage to just do it, Leslie. And I woke up one morning and I said, okay, I'm going to just go visit NILS and I'll call you when I get back. And I drove an hour to the trailhead, and I know the trail really well. So I felt safe and I was doing it by myself. And it took me about 3 hours to hike up, which normally would take me an hour and a half. And I got to the summit and I dug his plaque up out of the ground and I found him. And I sat there and I ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I brought some of his ashes with me and I threw them out to the wind, and I got up and I left him and I said, I'll see you next year. So I'm still in physical therapy, so I'll keep you posted on when I can run. I think I definitely live differently today. I feel like I live more intentionally. I try to be more present. I think I've definitely gotten more patient. I had to recreate my focus on what was a priority, which is to learn how to walk again. I learned a lot about people and their kindness and their willing to help. It's interesting how sometimes being handicapped can break down barriers. And I have made more friends being crippled this past year than I ever did the first 2 years living in America. I have had friends watch me as I've gone to the gym and in the rehab that I've been physical therapy, and they've let me know that I'm getting better and that I'm progressing and that they're praying for me. And I think that when I couldn't see it myself, that they were able to see it. And to me, that's been really humbling. I put I put the manuscript away for many years because I had started Love Nils, and now I'm in the final stages of editing, and hopefully it will be released this year. But I think it was necessary to relive the story, and I found that it was really healing. It was times when there was like total joy of, how these communities that came together for NILS that I was writing about. Like, I remember his schoolmates were in school and they had their spring break off during a term, and they were all given a photograph by their teachers of NILS to take with them on their journeys and their adventures and their travels. Like, these kids were off skydiving, or they're scuba diving, or they were, going to Bali or different places and volcanoes. And then they would take a photograph of themselves holding Nils's picture in all these places. And then they would send it to Nils. And I just remember it being so healing for him to have those moments. But there were also some really hard times to write about that were really emotional, especially when I would have to remember like the drain that the cancer was taking on Nils's body. And I remember early on in his cancer treatment when he was saying to me, Mom, why is this happening to me? Like, what did I do to deserve this? And I don't like this. I don't want to do this chemo and the cancer anymore. And, what would happen if I didn't do it? What if I just don't want to do it anymore? What if I don't want to do the treatment? And I remember sitting there just thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to say? And I came up with this crazy idea, and I just told him I didn't have all the answers. But I said, I promise to take care of you every step of the way. I will be here you for as long as it takes, no matter how good, hard, ugly, or easy it is. I will make sure that I will be with you. And I told him I wanted something in return. And I remember him looking at me like, you're crazy. Why would you ask me, the cancer kid, to give you something in return? But I said to him, when I get old and I'm gray and I'm feeble, I want you to take care of me for the same amount of time that I'm taking care of you. So if this cancer lasts 6 months or however long it takes, I want you to take care of me for 6 months. And I'd be maybe totally fine, or I may be ill, but I want you to be there for the same amount of time that it's taking me to take care of you. And I just said, is that a deal? And he said, sure. And I remember I stuck out my pinky, and he stuck out his pinky, and we shook pinky promise on that. And it may sound kind of like a crazy, silly story, but that little pinky promise got more mileage over that year than you can ever imagine. It saved him when he was losing hope, but it also created a lot of laughter when I just look at him and put the pinky out. So I think that the writing about the journey really saved me in my grief. I think I realized that when I was writing, there was a story about all that I'd learned as a caregiver and the cancer world of a child. And I offer a lot of tips and tricks and advice of how to be an advocate for yourself and for the patient, how you navigate the healthcare system, how you take care of yourself, how you ask for, ask for help. I guess caregivers when I was taking care of Nils, you just kind of get overwhelmed. You feel like you're alone. And I try to offer advice. I think one of the things that we don't realize as caregivers or as patients is that people really want to help and they just don't know how to. So as a caregiver or a patient, getting a friend or a point person that can arrange the groceries to come to your house, having someone take the siblings out, someone to come do your laundry, or someone to drop the food off at the hospital, are, really simple ways, simple tips that can help. I think another, just trying to be an advocate for yourself and not be scared to talk to the doctors and to tell them how you want it to be done. I remember, for example, when Nils was really critically ill and I just couldn't get the doctors together on the same page. And I was trying everything and I was asking them over and over, can we sit down and talk together? And I just couldn't get it done. And I found a back way in and I talked to the chaplain at the hospital and I said, can you please help me navigate this? And he was my in, and he pulled all the doctors together and he got them to sit down together with me. And when we did, we kind of got to yes of where we wanted to go together. So I think that the book, I hope, my direction is to have it aimed at, medical personnel, caregivers, patients, teachers, kind of anyone who's caring for or supporting a critically ill person. But I think the important message would be for hope for all caregivers who struggle to kind of feel empowered and enabled. Yeah, I would take him back to Colorado to the last hike we did above Vail Pass. It was the summer before he got sick. And I took he and his sister on a new hike that we'd never done before. And it was started off at about 10,000 feet. And it was winding along this creek bed through the pines, up along this trail, the columbine flowers. And we'd hiked a few hours. And I remember Claire was really tired and she was just not having it anymore. But Nils wanted to keep going because we could see the crest of this mountain at not too far away, just in our reach. And I said, are you okay to just stay here, Claire? And so she sat there on this log that we left her at. And I felt terrible about leaving her, but we would be back in just a few minutes. We weren't really back in a few minutes. We kept hiking on this hike that kind of went up towards this grassy, steep slope that didn't have a trail. And we got to the ridge of the ridge above the grass. And I remember just looking down, it just opened up to this huge basin that was filled with ridges of mountains. And we sat and we dangled our legs over the edge. And I remember I held his hand and we talked and I said, I'll promise to bring you back here next year. And we're going to camp and we're going to hike around the ridge. So that's what I would do. I'm no expert in any of these, but I know the human spirit is not indestructible, but it's remarkably adaptive. And when we're given care and support, we can grow through love and grief and become resilient. And I think we can endure more than we ever imagined and still find meaning on the other side.